Behind this door is the red zone, the very front line of Palom Memorial Hospital's COVID-19 battleground. Immediately, we find casualties, all of them positive with coronavirus in the thick of its second wave to hit Nigeria. We're brought into a room where a patient has summed up enough strength to sit up in his bed. He's an American pilot who was infected during a flight over the festive period.
I've been here, I guess, 3 or 4 days, and I don't know, sometimes I feel improvement, sometimes I don't. Well, I can hardly breathe, so my chest was full. Well, my symptoms started probably on the 24th or 25th of December, and I'm part of a flight crew, so the whole flight crew, the flight attendant got sick, and she thought she had a cold, and so then the co-pilot got sick. He thought he had a cold. So the 26th, we got a little worse, so we went and got tested. And today's a good day. Today's a good day. Well, you know, I don't fear COVID, but it is a bad deal.
We've spoken to the gentleman, and though he is in high spirits, the gravity of the situation is undeniable. He has been at the facility for the past 3 to 4 days, and though he says today is a good day in terms of his symptoms, he has most certainly had more difficult ones. And though he is optimistic for the future, it is a very serious situation on the ground. We have, as I've just said, spoken to a patient, and we're hoping to speak to medical professionals to get their insight on their work at this very trying time.
So when we started in June, it was still new, and we managed our way through it, seeing patients and having success rates and all, and everything went down. The second wave has been like a chaos, because it started, we had a peak in November, people coming in, no bed space. We've converted so many places that shouldn't have been converted to wards. So the situation right now, it's a bit alarming. We, the health workers who are working in here, can understand, but we need to relate to others that this is the situation on ground.
This facility is meant to hold 11 patients. At the time of our arrival, there were 14. And with a car with another COVID-positive patient arriving downstairs, there's no sign of this wave subsiding anytime soon.
First of all, it's very annoying going out there to hear people who say COVID-19 is a scam, hear people say it's not real, we don't have it. It's very annoying with what we are facing here. So what I have to tell to Lagosians, what I have to tell Nigerians is that COVID-19 is real, and the second wave of COVID-19 is much worse than the first wave.
Despite the growing number of COVID-19 infections in Nigeria, the number of recoveries has far outweighed the number of deaths. But one look at this patient struggling to breathe in intensive care is enough to sow a seed of skepticism in even the most devout believer. As the sound of painful coughs fill the corridor, one can't help but hear 3 words of warning ring out to those still doubting the danger of this virus. This isn't over. Adefemi Akinsanya, Arise News, Lagos.
All right, back from the COVID treatment center here in Lagos is Arise correspondent Adefemi. She joins us now. She did that video you saw there. Glad to have you join us.
Good to be here.
I love the way you're smiling. Yeah. But it's not a smiling affair, yes, really, particularly when you hear the doctor, the second doctor you interviewed, saying that this is annoying, that people are calling this a scam. How did that come across to you? And did you get to feel the pulse of the doctor when he was saying that? I mean, did you try to get into his mind to think about, you know, he's saying this is annoying when people say it's a scam.
Yeah, you could definitely...
Because of what they're going through.
You could feel his frustration because these are people who are on the very front line of this pandemic. And when you're having to treat people, make very difficult decisions as to who gets a ventilator, who doesn't, who you can shut your doors to, who you can accept, to hear still that there are people on the street saying, no, this is not even something to worry about. You can imagine how frustrating that can be because, as we've seen in that report, these people are having to make life and death decisions all of the time. To hear that cough, that's the first time I've heard somebody who is ill with the virus really suffering.
Struggling to breathe.
Yes, and so it was really eye-opening for a lot of us. You know, before we went into the red zone, I'd asked my cameraman, Okbe,
What's the red zone?
Red zone is the front line. So this is where you cannot enter without any serious protective gear. That's where you know you're going to have COVID-positive people. There's a yellow zone, which is where people can, you'll still need a face mask, but you won't be around any COVID-positive people. But once you cross that red door and that red line on the floor into the zone, that's when you know this is very serious. These people are sick. These people are in intensive care. So you have to be very, very mindful of, you know, how you're going to interact with people once you cross that line. So it is quite scary, I think. Yeah. As brave as, you know, as the average person is, it's still definitely a different experience to look face to face to somebody who is suffering. So the pilot that we spoke to there, who we see on the screen, he said that he first started noting symptoms around Christmas, and he noticed that his colleague, they're all on the same aircraft, she fell ill, and then his co-pilot fell ill, and then him as the pilot fell ill too. And though that is a private facility, he did say that the company that he works for, the airline, is paying their bills. But then that leads to another difficulty a lot of private institutions are going to have. It's one thing saying that you have to pay for our services, but if we don't have the space to take you, then now your money doesn't really make any difference. And that's why you really have to take care, because a lot of times here in Nigeria, a certain clientele may feel as though as long as they have access to means, they'll have access to adequate healthcare. And this time you realize that it's not in your control anymore. Yeah. So with Paylon Memorial, they're supposed to only have 11 patients at their facility, and they have now 14. And that number would have inevitably grown because as we were arriving, we saw somebody arrive in their vehicle and they were taking into the tent, put on gas. So then it was quite obvious that that person themselves was also positive. So it's quite a lot to deal with there.
Indy was saying about getting into the mind of the doctor who feels annoyed. Let's try and get into the mind of people who are skeptical, because that's what I do a lot, because I try and understand why is it that you're still skeptical in the midst of all this. One of the reasons that came to my mind is, you know, when you mentioned not into your control, a lot of people may feel that preventing catching COVID is not within their control, so they faith it, in quotes, or they decide, I'll leave it to God. So is there any, do you understand that mindset, and how do we get past this?
It's almost like going into a motorway with lots of vehicles going up and down and saying that God will protect me from one side of the road to the other. You have to, you know, realize that heaven helped those who help themselves. So while you can be steadfast in your belief that you will be protected supernaturally, you also have to make the efforts to make sure that you are okay. You know, another interesting thing we found out is that it's more than just infecting your immediate family. You may well do so, and they may all well be fine, but it's the fifth person you don't see who you would have affected, who may have died. So I think that at this point, if you are still skeptical, there's almost not much help for you until you catch it yourself, and it's so sad.
You don't really want to learn that.
I remember one young man in Abuja, you know, who felt that there was the COVID-19 until he entered isolation center, and he now began to broadcast it to everybody who wants to cares to listen.
It's real.
And that's at the point where it gets dangerous, because it becomes life-threatening. You can live or die. I was listening to when I was a nurse or a doctor, the first one before the doctor who talked about being annoying, you know, saying that during the first wave, at a point, it got down. It began to peter out. But now with the second phase, he used, okay, that's the lady who is breathing very heavily, you know, or that's a ventilator, I guess. Okay, so she said it's with the second wave, it's chaos. That's the way she described it. And then she talked about the frustration, used that word, of how to relate it to people, you know, and that's where the challenge is for me.
Still at this point, you know, when it first came, people thought that, well, this is a virus that is affecting people who have the means to travel. If you can't afford to travel outside the country, if you don't have a passport, then this shouldn't be, you know, your issue. It's the rich person's virus. And then over time, I think that I would like to think that people started to realize, well, actually, if they're saying that we can't go to the market and we can't go and do this and they're keeping us at home, maybe this is something that is affecting all of us. Once we came out of lockdown, especially here in Lagos State, you did feel an easing of tension that perhaps since they're letting us back out again, things are under control. It's still mandated that you must wear a face covering in Lagos State, which people still do. You will see face masks. It's a question of, are they being worn correctly? And do you know why you're wearing them? So I think that's going to be the biggest challenge. At the beginning of a new year, lots of people are optimistic for the future in the belief that perhaps COVID-19 is something that stayed in 2020, and that's not the case. It has followed us into this new year. We are very much in the throes of the second wave, and as you heard them say, this second wave is going to be far worse than the first one.
Yes, and
so
it's alarming. Use the word chaos. I use the word alarming, which is quite... All right, thank you for doing very fantastic work, Femi, there.